Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's seminar. Today's speaker is David Loiseau, and he will talk to us about multi-parameter persistence for machine learning. Please take it away.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Anna, for this nice presentation. And thank you for inviting me to this seminar. For me, just let me put a timer up. So for me, this talk is just an excuse to give you some nice pictures and some way of doing multi-parameter persistence for machine learning. And as there are a lot of notation, I'm more into putting pictures instead of big definitions. Yeah, and also to do a bit of advertisement for my work. Multi-parameter persistence is a subfield of TDA. Okay. And TDA is just like an applied mathematics strategy to do to recover some topological structure from data sets. So for example, here you have the cellular cycle, and if you compute some stuff over time on cells, you can really find this cellular cycle when you compute the so-called persistence diagram from TDA, and you see that you recover the cycle of the cell cycle. But yeah, the main way of presenting TDA in general is with a point cloud. It's the easiest way to do it. So you start from a point cloud, you turn this point into balls, and by doing so, you've changed the topology. So like you have a cycle here that appear, and if you increase the radii of this ball, you will create other cycle, and at some point they will die because they are contractible. And what you end up with this check filtration is the persistent homology in the form of a barcode, and that is a sequence of bars like this that represent the cycles of some topological features. And it works because if you have a cycle, as you have an inclusion map from the left to the right, you can see if this cycle persists after that. And so you can really define this lifetime like this. I will just go directly now to multi-parameter persistence. So a simple way to motivate it is that sometimes you have data sets for which you have multiple layers. So for example, here I have a piece of human tissues, and you can create some immunofluorescence images from it. So for example, here you have immune cells. So I have a immunofluorescence. So that's basically a density map of immune cells, and you can do the same for cancer cells, but you can have other protein markers. And so basically you have two functions and you want to find topological structures, but between these two images at the same time. So basically you want to consider this two parameter filtration that would be the sublevel set of this image intersected at this image. So this corresponds to, you consider only dense point here up to a threshold S and dense point here up to a threshold T, and you want to be able to look at the topology of the intersection of this for these two parameters. Another funny motivation is from time series. So when you look at time series, you can hope to find some periodicity signal. So it will in form of Fourier features, for example. And when you do the so-called time delay embedding, you will end up with some, so that's an embedding, you basically embed this time series into a higher dimensional space, so here it's R2, and this time series become some kind of curve like this, and you will end up, you will translate Fourier features, so periodicity of the structure of your signal into cycles in homology in some way. And the nice part about multi-parameter persistence is that, of course, as the one-parameter persistence, you can retrieve these cycles. But as you can see here, you have some different color for the cycle, and they correspond to the intensity on which, or if you want, the density of this curve. So the curve goes a bit more on some cycles, and so you can take that into account when you do two-parameter persistence. You take one axe for the radius parameter, and you add another axe that corresponds to the intensity of each cycle. And so you retrieve a bit more. So I will be a bit more explicit with this example. So here with your eyeball distance, you see an annulus, but I've added some diffuse noise in the background. So basically, if you compute the one parameter persistence as usual, you will see that the points in the middle will close the gap really fast because you have a bunch of points in the middle, but not that much. And so when you compute the persistence barcode, you see that here each bar corresponds to the lifetime of some cycle appearing in the check filtration of this. But you see that you don't have like a huge bar corresponding to the lifetime of your annulus. So you've more or less destroyed the topology with just a few points. And so one way to deal with this would be to, you can compute the density estimation of your dataset and try to find a threshold to remove the low density points. So you can do that, you will retrieve the annulus. But there are at least two issues with this. The first one being that you have to first find this threshold. And so that can be a problem if your dataset is not homogeneous, for example. And the second would be that here my sampling measure has three modes that I won't be able to recover if I only consider the location of the points. And these modes can be really interesting because they convey some information. So for example, for the curvature, you can retrieve some information, some amount of information of the curvature with the concentration points of your sampling measure, for example. And how to deal with that with the two-parameter persistence? You put the usual persistence on the top on the upper slice. So you have your point cloud with the increasing radii of the ball strategy. And you add another layer that will be given to you by the density. So below here, I only have very dense point. And I progressively allow, when I go upper, um, lesser dense point to appear. So here, only dense point. See here, only medium points. Only medium dense points. And here, every point, basically. So yeah, I take into account the density and the radius parameter. And so now the goal would be to identify some kind of lifetime like this that correspond to the lifetime of the annulus. So it's a shape that corresponds to the lifetime of my annulus there, instead of just one bar for the one parameter persistence. And this filtration is defined formally as something like this. So it's the union of balls that are dense enough at a fixed radius. If you look at this filtration at coordinate R and D. And now you look at the homology of this two-parameter filtration, and the homology will turn each topological space into a vector space, and the inclusion maps will become linear maps between these vector spaces. So more formally, it's something like this. You want to take a look at a family of vector spaces with linear maps, so M between parentheses x less than y, between mx and my for any positive arrow x smaller than y. And you want that if you do a loop, you want this map to be the identity, and you want if you take different paths to go to a point, that they commute. So now the question is, as I've said earlier, is to how to retrieve this kind of shape like this. So there is a way to do that with something that is called module approximation, multi-parameter module approximation. And how to do that? You basically, so imagine that you want to retrieve these two shapes here. So you have a blue cycle and a red cycle whose lifetime are defined with these two shapes. And you will draw some diagonal lines like this. And each line, if you take your module and you slice it through a fixed line like this, it will define a one parameter persistence module. And so the one parameter persistence, we already know it. You can compute the barcode on it. So when you compute the barcode on this line, on this slicing, what you will get is the traces of your shapes along this line. So you get this kind of barcodes like this. And the next step now is to color these barcodes with some strategy to recover these shapes. So you have something like this now. So you have colored barcode on these lines. And now you can just infer some shapes with respect to these barcodes. So you want this shape to be the less complicated as possible. So you minimize the number of corners, for example. And you want this shape you want the boundary on this shape to cross these barcode endpoints. And you will get something like this on the right, so you can compute it. So here on the left, I have my two-parameter filtration, and on the right, I have the output of this algorithm. So here, each colored shape corresponds to a cycle on the left. So here you have like some kind of rainbow strip like this that correspond to a bunch of little cycles that are really dense because they are on the lower part of the filtration. And the RIPS parameter is small. So this corresponds to small cycles that you get on the modes of your sampling measure. And you have a nice huge shape here, this green shape that will correspond exactly to this shape here. And as you can see, this significant shape really retrieves the lifetime of the annulus. And so, yeah, we basically retrieved it. And the nice part about it is that if you pick the slice, the uppermost slice, you basically look at the persistence of the top slice here, which contain all of the points. So it's exactly the persistence given by the check filtration. So that's exactly the barcode. And you have a bijection between each bar here and a color that you get here. So yeah, that's really nice. And just another example that is a bit more illustrative. Here I have like a bunch more points. So that's basically a uniform measure on the square on which I've added a bit of topological signal as annulus. And yeah, that's it. And so how to interpret it? So I have three cycles here. The first one is really dense and small. So dense means that it will appear on the lower part of the filtration, and small means that it will get killed rather quickly by the radius parameter. So it corresponds to this shape because it's low, below and get kills here. The second one is slightly bigger, so you can expect it to last a bit longer with respect to the RIPS parameter, the radius parameter. And it's slightly less dense, so slightly upper. And the same goes for the third one. So it's slightly upper and slightly more on the right. Yeah, and you have a fourth shape here that corresponds exactly to what you get when you connect these three topological signals together. So that's really nice, you can interpret it. And just to give you orders of magnitude, we have a bunch of points, and it only takes 5 lines of Python to compute this, and 1 minute on my laptop, but my laptop is not particularly powerful, so you can really do stuff in multi-parameter persistence. But of course, the picture is not
Quick
as
question.
yes.
So, I mean, when you say 5 lines of Python, you mean 5 lines of Python using what, the certain library? Like, are you using?
Yes, that's my library. I will do some
Ah,
advertisement at the end of this, so don't
I
worry,
see.
you will have. Yeah, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and so yeah, the picture is not as yeah happy as it because you can create some weird structure with just a few points. So let me give you a small example. So here I'm looking at connected components, so degree zero homology. And yeah, so basically I have a red point that appears here. So its lifetime would be like this kind of square like this. And the blue point appears here, so its lifetime would be a rectangle like this. So here, no problem. The homology is just two rectangle shapes. But the fun begins when we start to connect these points. So we'll add some edges like this. And now in homology, everything is, the red is equal to the blue when they all exist together. So, and all of the maps in homology are the identity. So from any arrow is the identity. But the issue appears when we disconnect this point here around here, because we will create a two-dimensional structure. And yeah, that's an issue. And this comes from, and you won't be able to split them apart. And this comes from the fact that as opposed to the one parameter case where, yeah, in the one parameter case, you have a nice matching between a cycle and the boundaries that kills this cycle. So for example, if I take the horizontal slice, I have these blue points that appear that get killed by this edge here. But if I take another slice, so for example, the vertical slice, these red points would get killed by this segment here. So you see that the matching is not valid anymore because you can have multiple passes that create different matching. And so one way to deal with that is just to ignore this matching. So I will just, sorry, there is a mosquito. Yeah, let me just give you an example of ignoring this matching in the one parameter case. So here I have a barcode, so I have three cycles that appear at some point on a one parameter filtration. So I add I will add blue points for the burst time and red points for the death time, and ignoring this pairing, this matching basically correspond to just consider the Diracs. So you have three blue Diracs that will be positive Diracs for me, and three red Diracs that will be negative Diracs. And you can redefine them from the barcode. So you just have three positive Diracs and three negative Diracs like this. And you just ignore the matching like this. And you can play the same game with the two parameter case. So just on this example, I have my red point that is whose birth time is here, so I will add a blue point here. The same for the blue point. And once I crossed this red region, I have to kill either here it's the red points and here it's the blue points. So I have to kill someone, but I have to re-add them back here because like, I have killed both red and blue, so I have to re-add them here. So it's a bit weird, but yeah, in the end you get this measure that let me give you the definition, it will be simpler. So basically, for any multi-parameter persistence module, I can give you a finite discrete measure exactly as what I showed you here, so in sum of Dirac with a positive or minus signs that completely characterize your dimension vector or the Hilbert function. That's why you have HF here of your multi-parameter persistence module. And you can already compute all of this, of course. So here, for example, I have a point cloud that has an annulus that is a bit more concentrated than the rest. So if you imagine that the rest is the noise in the background, you want to retrieve the annulus, and you get something like this. And this measure is basically the blue points are positive Diracs, and the red points are negative Diracs. And you can see here in the boundary that you have like a sequence of blue and red Diracs that creates the boundary. So you're really counting the dimension of your module with this. You're encoding this. And just to give you an example on how to compute that without mathematical tools, basically if you have a rectangle here, the measure created with this will be something like this. So when you enter the rectangle, you have to add the blue points. And when you get out of the rectangle, you have to kill it with 2 red points. But as you have killed it, you have to re-add it in the end of the rectangle. And now, as a module is discrete, so it has a finite number of filtration values, you can just cover your filtration with this kind of rectangles, and you will get your sign measure. Yeah, and the nice part about this measure is that they are induced by some kind of operation that is called the Möbius inversion, and it works as long as you're considering an invariant that is z-valued and behaves properly with respect to your filtration. So you can do the same construction exactly for the Euler characteristics. So you can find a measure that completely encodes your Euler characteristics. So you have a plot here. And you can do the same for the rank invariant. And so the rank invariant is defined as it's not dim here, it's the rank, sorry. So if you pick any 2 points in your multi-parameter filtration, you would look at the rank of the map from these 2 coordinates, okay? And this rank for any 2 pairs of coordinates will be characterized by this sign measure, but this time it will be in R4, okay? So that's why you have big bars like this, because each point is in R4 is encoded as the birth time and the death time here. Okay, so it's a bit more complicated, so I won't go into the details, but basically if you want to have the rank between 2 points that are around here, as you don't have any bars, the rank will be 0. And around here, if you have 2 bars here, you will count the number of bars that are bigger than the bar that you are considering, basically. And if you sum them up, you will get the rank of your module between these 2 coordinates. Okay, so just to recap, we have defined some way of representing our multi-parameter filtration using some invariants. So here you have the sign measure that are derived from the sign barcodes. And here you have module approximations. But you cannot really use them in machine learning per se. You need to turn them into something that is usable. And something easy to do is just to use vectorization. So one way to do this is just you have your 2-parameter persistence module here. And if you slice it, I've already said that you can look at the persistent homology of this slide because it's 1 parameter. And as we already know how to vectorize 1-parameter persistent homology, so you can turn each slice into a vector and just stack them up like this. And so that's how you get multi-parameter persistent landscape. So you go a bit more into the details. If you pick a coordinate point here, x, okay, you look at the diagonal line that crosses x, and you look at then the vectorization of the landscape of this 1-parameter module that is a restriction of your module to this line. And just as a reminder, you get the landscape by doing something like this. So you start from a persistence diagram, so that will be point in the plane, okay? And you just rotate them by 90 degrees, and you will get the rank function. And yeah, and by looking at the boundaries, you define this kind of landscape like this that when you evaluate them on a grid, will give you this nice image. Okay, so you've just stacked one parameter filtration, and that will give you a representation. But of course, these shapes contains a bit more information than just slices. So what you can do in general is just to represent a strategy that is derived from the strategy of Persley, if you know it, is to derive each shape, basically. So if you are able to vectorize each shape, okay, then you just have to sum them up together to get a vectorization of everything. So you vectorize an individual interval here, you weight it a little bit, and you just use a permutation invariant operation to define your vectorization. So just to give you a bit more details, your multi-parameter persistent landscape, just as I've defined before, your representation of one interval at point X would be just the landscape of this shape at point X. So it's, sorry, I'm a bit fast. Huh? And for the, okay. My arrows doesn't work. Okay, it's fixed, sorry. And to get this representation, what I'm doing is to do something like this. So I'm doing an L2 norm with respect to this weight, which is the price that you have to pay to send a shape to 0, but that's a definition like this. And the way I'm representing each shape, so each interval, is by the exponential map of minus the sign distance to my shape. So basically, if I want to represent, if I want to vectorize this shape at this point, I would look at the distance to this shape, and I put an exponential map on top of it. And if I'm inside, there is just a minus sign. So yeah, that's the sign distance. So I take minus the distance to the boundary. So that's why you have this nice difference between inside and outside of the shape. Okay, and I didn't even talk about the sign measure yet, so let me do it. So you start with some data set. You transform this data set into a multi-parameter filtration. So here it's, as I said at the beginning, a time delay embedding. You use your multi-parameter persistence machinery to compute some sign measure with respect to some invariant. And then you just convolve it to get a representation of your dataset using multi-parameter persistence. Okay. And of course, as you have different sign measure at your disposal, you can do a bunch of stuff and vectorize them in a bunch of different ways. Yeah, so of course, all of this creates some choices, and these choices you have to, imagine that you have a machine learning task. You have to find the best way to represent your dataset using your different options, and that can be hard. And as another example, if you start, for example, from a graph, so a graph, even though you don't even have initially labels at some point, you can compute them. So for example, like you can compute for each node the degree of this node, so that the number of incoming edges. You can also compute curvatures. So if you imagine the curvature from a manifold, you can interpret this curvature as like flow rate on this manifold, and you can take this interpretation and define another curvature on graphs. Yeah, so that gives you like a way to give a value to this node. You can also use the Laplacian of the graph to define hit kernels and wave kernel and whatever. So you can create a bunch of stuff on a graph. And yeah, there is this issue of rescaling the filtration, because when you're looking at distance in applied multi-parameter persistence, you have to compare the filtration together to define properly distance between persistence modules. And as the degrees are usually arbitrarily large and curvature and heat wave stuff like this are usually small real numbers, you cannot really compare them together. So it can be an issue. And I will just keep this example. Yeah, and the key to solve all of this is differentiability. So if you have a bunch of parameters and you want to find the best one, you just have to like optimize this parameter with respect to some loss. So yeah, how to do that with I will start with the one parameter case. So you start with some filtration function on which you compute persistent homology. And yeah, the persistent homology, you can look at it as a family of bars like this. So it's the barcode. And the endpoints of the barcode are given by the filtration values of the cycle that creates the topological structure. and the filtration value of the boundary that close this topological structure. Okay. So yeah, so the endpoint of the bar are really filtration values of some simplices. And so in particular, as long as you don't change the order that is given to you by f, by your function, so they are ordered with respect to f, if you change the filtration value of a given simplex, it will only move the endpoint of the bars like this, as long as you don't change the order, of course. And so on the set in which the order is fixed, this map acts affinely on the persistent homology of f. And as you have a finite number of combination of your simplices, you have a finite number of cells on which this maps acts affinely with respect to f. So basically, you have a finite number of cells on which you're affine, and so you can define. So of course, if you're affine, you are differentiable almost everywhere, and yeah, you can define the limits of gradients, and so you can define yeah, you have a differentiability setup. So I will go into the detail. I will go into the details a bit more for the multi-parameter case. But for the sign measure, okay. So in the two-parameter case, I have a filtration like this. So I define, there is a filtration value for three simplices, sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3. And sigma 1 appears in here, okay, so its lifetime is on this cone here. Sigma 2 appears here on this cone. And sigma 3 is lifetime in the same way, it's this cone. And when you compute a sign measure, you will end up with something like this. So you can have blue points, so positive Diracs at some points, and you can have negative Diracs at some points. But there is a little subtlety with the one parameter case, a little difference, is that some topological stuff can happen outside of the filtration value of some simplices, but they are restricted to the intersection, basically. So you can have stuff that happen in the intersection of these cones. So yeah, it's a bit more involved, but you proceed the same way to get differentiability. So how to do that? I will give you just an example for this one. So basically, you have your two-parameter filtration here. You define a grid from the first parameter filtration value and the second parameter filtration values. And then I will define for each parameter a permutation. So for the first parameter, I have sigma 1 that appears first, then sigma 2, and then sigma 3. So my first permutation will be 1, 2, 3. And for the second parameter, I have sigma 2 that appears first, then sigma 3, then sigma 1. So I have 2, 3, 1 like this. Okay? And I will also define f hat to be the map that sends coordinate yj, integer yj, sorry, to the corresponding coordinate in the grid G. Okay? So that I have something like this. I have that f is equal to the composite of f hat and p. Okay, so just as an example, if I take this coordinate here, so it appears first for, it's the second parameter for, yes, so basically it's 2 for the P1. So I have a 2 here for, okay, no. Okay, yeah, I have 2 here. And for the second parameter, it appears first. So I have a, yeah, I have a 2 here. Okay. And so when I apply f hat to it, I will recover f2, f of sigma 2. Yeah. And okay, so now if we go to the filtration level, if I look at the sub-level set of this p function here, I will get something like this. So it's just the same filtration as f. It's just that I've pushed it back to the integers. And now if I push forward this the filtration induced by this p function, I will recover the filtration of f. So it's just a coordinate version of this filtration. And now if you go at the homology level, you apply the homology to get a sign measure now. Your filtration will be transferred to a sign measure. So you have Diracs, positive Diracs and red Diracs here. And now f star is just some kind of rescaling of your grid. So if I go back to here, what I'm saying is just that I'm basically yeah, I'm basically factorizing f into integer coordinates to write it as yeah, to write this measure mu of f, sorry, as a push forward as the as the sign measure for this P function that is just the permutation for each parameter. So we have this chain of equality. So mu of f is equal to the push forward for this f hat of the measure that you get for this permutation given by f. And now you can define a cell for this function f to be the filtration values, the filtration g's, such that the permutation for each parameter, so meaning that the order of each simplex here for each parameter is the same for f and g. So if you move a little bit this point here to create a function g that is close to f, as long as you don't change the order for each parameter, I will say that f and g are in the same cell. Okay? And for this cell, as this map is just the push forward of g hat, so it's just a rescaling of the grid, basically, you have that this map is affine. So you have the same stuff. So basically, you have that in the multi-parameter case for this sign measure, the map that sends you a filtration to this sign measure is locally affine. So yeah, so you have the same differentiability framework as in the one parameter case. So in this paper, we showed that we showed this result for a slightly wider range of multi-parameter persistence invariants. So these are called similarly determined on grid, but the idea is really the same. It's just that if your invariant is determined by this permutation, basically, so the order of the simplices for each parameter, then you will have some kind of semilinearity results, meaning that you have a differentiability framework. I will go to it just after that. So in particular, of course, this includes all of the invariants that we already defined. And we can define for any such invariant that is gentle enough a subdifferential on each point. So the subdifferential is just the convex hull of the limits of the gradients. So it's just a way to define a gradient where you don't have one, but almost everywhere you have a gradient. And so in particular, you can apply that to a machine learning pipeline. So this theorem is just an example. So imagine that you have a filtration that is parameterized. So you have a parameter theta that defines you a filtration of some simplicial complex K. Okay. Then you apply your invariant alpha, and then you apply your loss here, that will be your machine learning pipeline. And as long as your composite is locally Lipschitz, which is really reasonable, then any stochastic gradient descent on this composite function will converge to a critical point of f. Okay. Meaning that you can optimize the composite of this. So this is a filtration on which you apply your invariant and you apply your machine learning pipeline to it. Okay, just to be a bit more concrete, I will go to the example of the graph that I showed you earlier. So here on your graph, you had a bunch of values for each node. So the position, the degree, curvature, etc. So you have some nice vector that is in a high dimensional space. And then what you can do is to define a function that takes this value and turns it into, or it's not exactly that, it's, but yeah, okay, takes the value of all of the filtration values of your nodes and turn that into a filtration, a filtration of this graph. So K here is the graph. So you're basically learning a filtration of this graph based on the features value that you have on each node, basically. Then once you have this filtration with a reasonable number of parameters, you can now compute your filtration because it's reasonable, and then apply your machine learning loss. So it can be a way to, for example, classify graphs. So you can imagine that, but basically this whole pipeline makes that you learn a function phi that split apart graph with different label, more or less. And this filtration, you learn it from the labels of your nodes. So I don't know if I'm clear, but you can ask me question if that's the case. Yeah, okay. And another example, so these are more toy examples, so just a nice animation to watch. So basically you start from a point cloud, okay, and I will create a two-parameter filtration with the following filtration. So the first one will be given by the radius parameter, as usual, and the second one will be given by this function. So we just define a function. So here it's a mixture of three Gaussian maps, okay, and yeah, that will be my second parameter. And so basically you look at the points, your simplicial complex will be the points that are close enough together and that are close enough to this kind of modes of your of this maps. So the sublevel set of this map, basically. Okay, so you start with a point cloud like this. You can compute with respect to these two parameter filtration some sign measure, and the loss would be something like this. So it will be the integral of some function with respect to the measure. So it's smooth with respect to mu, where mu is your sign measure. And this function basically try to reduce the radius and the density, the density of your cycles. So, and imagine that you have a cycle around here, around the mode of your of the measure. If you reduce the radius, you will increase the density of it, because if you reduce the radius, you will get closer basically to the center of this. And so the radius parameter and the density parameter will fight against each other, and you will end up with something like this, basically. Okay, we'll end up with something like this, and how to interpret this? Basically, you have each cycle that balance with the radius and the density, and you will get some kind of onion shape around each mode. And another example so for example, here you take an MMA decomposition, sorry, and you take the three densiest most cycle, and you will try to, like, you pick the shapes here that correspond to their lifetime, you will try to make them bigger. And so if you do something like this, you will end up with, okay. You will end up with something like this. So basically, you've summoned topology with respect to the second map. And as you see, I didn't really move the other points apart from these ones. You can really summon topology by doing a strategy like this. So it's really nice. Well, I will skip this example. And if I have time, I can do this one, for example. So here it's an experiment from an autoencoder regularization. So you start from this point cloud, okay? And the goal is to encode it in the lower dimensional space. Okay, so the strategy of autoencoder in general in machine learning is something like this. So you start from a vector that is really high dimensional that you want to encode in a smaller dimensional space. So here it's called the latent space. And so basically you learn an encoder function and a decoder function, and you try to optimize the difference between the input and the output. And by doing so, you will enforce the middle space to encode all of the information of the big space. And so basically you've reduced the dimension using this encoder-decoder strategy. Okay. And the nice part about topology is that you can compute the topology at the level of RD here with a big D, and the topology here, and compare them. And hence you can regularize your autoencoder to enforce the latent space to preserve the topology of the original space. And by you just compute some topological descriptor from here and from here, you compare them, and here it's the optimal transport distance between the two measures that you are considering. Okay. And so that's the result of the experiment. So here you have your autoencoder. So I remind you that the initial data that we want to encode in a lower dimensional space is something like this. So it's basically two cycles with some noise in the background. And if you don't regularize with topology, you see that the cycle don't even close. So you don't really preserve the topology with these machine learning techniques. If you only consider a radius, so the RIPS, so the check filtration, so the one parameter filtration, to regularize it, to enforce that they preserve this topology. As you have the noise in the background, you see that here, as you have the noise in the background, the cycle will get closed too quickly. So that's the example that I showed you at the beginning. And so, you don't really recover the cycle here, because here you have this nice bar that doesn't really correspond to the annus. Whereas if you look at RIPS and density for regularization, for topological regularization, so that gives you the two parameter sign measure, you will enforce the latent space to preserve the topology of this. So that's really nice. You can regularize machine learning pipelines. And I will conclude here. So the outline is something like this. So basically, in the multi-parameter persistence, you can now, with these recent years, there have been a lot of stuff. So going on to compute them, basically. So you can compute and on reasonable data sets. So on my laptop, it's something like 100,000 simplices, but you can do a bit more with clusters, for example. And the multivariator persistent homology is a bit complicated, but you have a lot of smaller invariants that do not suffer from the issues of the whole picture. So the whole multivariator persistent module, which are a bit more complicated. So for example, you have this MMA decomposition that I showed you, this sign barcode, and you have other invariants, such as the projected barcode, or yeah, you have other invariants. And it will create you different plots, and you have different trade-off with computation time, or they encode different parts of the module, so you may want to retrieve some different information from the modules. And with the recent paper, all of this is differentiable and machine learning ready. So there have been plenty of papers recently that show different way to represent multiparameter persistent homology in a machine learning context. So you can do a lot of stuff now. And all of this is available on a Python library that I developed. Well, yeah, it's just you can install it with this. So it's called Multipers. And thank you very much for your attention. That's it.
Thank you, David, for the amazing presentation and for all the pictures. Before we get to questions, I would like to ask you to unmute yourselves and clap for the speaker. All right, so question time. If you have a question, please just unmute yourselves and speak or type your question into the chat.
Hi. I have a question. Thank you, David, for the talk. I was wondering if you performed some experiments or some examples in which you try to see what is the discriminative power of the different slicing that you might take. Because in the picture that you showed at the very beginning, you had this slicing with parallel lines, I had the impression. So I was wondering if you did some other type of slicing and if that changes a lot the experiments or not.
Yeah, so thank you for your question. So basically, yeah, so this is for diagonal lines. And so basically what you're encoding is the barcode on each slice, if you want, but in a continuous way for all of this. So you end up with more or less an approximation of the barcode on diagonal lines. So of course you can change the orientation, and we have the code for it in this library. You can change the orientation of the line, but I didn't do any test on it, but I don't know if, yeah, it should change a little bit, but I don't know how much. So I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to your question, but yeah, you can definitely do it. Yes, it would be interesting to know the answer of this.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
There is actually Baris was first, so maybe let's
All right, okay.
let Baris ask first, and then it will be your turn.
Hi, David. Great talk and great results, amazing results. So I have a question about your learnable multi-filtration functions. So you can, what I see here is you are fixing your vectorization and then finding the best filtration functions. Am I correct?
Sorry, I didn't get your question. So
you are fixing your vectorization for multi-filtration, and then you are finding the best filtration function for your downstream task.
Yes. So, okay. So in this alpha here, you can encode both the computation and the invariant and the vectorization of it. And this is also differentiable. So these two are differentiable. So the whole, everything is differentiable, and you can put the parameter of your vectorization inside of this alpha. Yes. So you can also learn the parameter of your vectorization. So basically this, you can vectorize the three of them at the same time with different kernels.
I see.
You learn all of this at the same time. It's not a problem.
So you are both finding the best filtration function and best vectorization end to
Yes.
end. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, next question.
Hi, David. Thank you for the talk. It's great. So I have a question somehow related to what I think there was a question about the discrimination power of this. Have you done any tests like feeding these representations into an actual machine learning pipeline to see the discrimination, let's say, as a classifier for 2 classes or 3 classes?
Yes. Yeah, sorry. You mean between the choice of this? I think we did at least for this two. So between the Euler characteristic here and the Hilbert function here. So not in maybe in this paper, but in the differentiability paper, we also did that, I think. But not for the rank because the rank is a bit more complicated to compute. So you can compute them, but in a machine learning scale, it's a bit harder. But we have the difference between the Euler and the Hilbert. And on graphs particularly, the Euler characteristic behaves a bit better than the Hilbert function. So that's nice because this is really cheap to compute the Hilbert characteristic for the Euler characteristic, sorry, because you can just iterate over the simplices to get this time measure. But on other datasets, such as a time series and a point cloud, the Hilbert function was a bit more performant. But we only did that in terms of benchmark. We didn't have any. So we used like commonly used dataset to see how we performed against other techniques, but we didn't use like real datasets for real problems.
Right, thank you.
Okay, next question is by Henry.
Yes, so David, I want to ask a question about this, 100,000 simplices is sort of the current computational limit. So I'm a little out of date with computations, but I used to be up to date. So back in like 2007 with software packages, it was maybe not state of the art, but was competitive. I remember for like trying to do Viator scripts of higher dimensional data sets, it was a big change when you could go from like 100,000 simplices to 1,000,000 simplices. And then that changed again with RIPSer. So I haven't done as much computations with like alpha complexes and lower dimensions, right? Or sublevel subpersistence. But I guess the two-part question would be, so do you see this being used mostly now on real data sets and lower dimensions, say on alpha complexes where you might only have 100,000 simplices? And then secondly, like, do you have any indication of how this might grow in the future? And is 1,000,000 simplices within reach, or does the computational complexity make that unclear?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yes, in fact, to me, the biggest problem is to try to find filtration that have not too much simplices. Because here, if you take the full RIPS, of course, you cannot compute that. But the issue is that if you pick the alpha complex, you will have an issue. I cannot draw you a picture. Maybe. Yes, I can draw you a picture. So that's why this filtration, you can compute it recently, is due to this paper, this function Delaunay paper, that basically creates an alpha complex with another function parameter that behaves well with the two parameter case. But in general, if you only pick the alpha complex with another layer, let me just do something. Yeah, okay. So imagine that you have an annulus here, and you put a point in the middle, but imagine that it appears like really late. Like in the second parameter, it never appears basically. So if you compute the alpha complex of this, you will have triangles like this. Sorry for my drawing. I don't have my tablet. But as this point never appears, basically you will never close this cycle here. So you cannot put only alpha complex and a function. You have to do a bit more work. And that's why, sorry, I'm trying to play with the, okay. So, okay, that's why oops, yeah, this function. So that's why there are alternatives to alpha complex for the two parameter case, but the bulk of the work is to try to find filtration that have not too much simplices. So in that case, we can do it. And there are a lot of speed ups also that we can do. So if I go to the conclusion, I think I have something. Yes. So of course there are ways to do edge collapses also in the multi-parameter case. You can also do coarsenings and stuff like that, and minimal presentation. So that's algebraic tricks to basically encode your filtration with a lower number of it's not simplices anymore, but in a way it's cell complex if you want. Yeah, and so basically there is a lot of pre-processing that you can do to reduce the number of simplices to do these computations. And yeah, in general, I think it's problematic to go to like 1 million simplices. You will start to have issues because edge collapse start to be slow. I don't know about this one, but yeah. But yeah, I've stopped to 1000 simplices, but my laptop is not particularly powerful, so I guess you can go a bit upper.
Right.
Yeah, the main issue for me is to try to find ways to represent your data in a multi-parameter way that has not too much simplices. Or you can coarsen your module, so meaning that you can merge filtration values together so that you don't have a lot of filtration values. So you can compute that on a smaller subgrid if you want. And if the grid is not too big, you can also compute stuff. And you also have invariants that are really cheap to compute. So as I said, the Euler characteristic is linear with respect to the number of simplices to compute. And so you have a bunch of tricks, but yeah, I don't see how you could compute stuff with the multi-million simplices filtration.
Right.
I think it will start to be harder, yeah.
But let me just propose something that might be interesting to folks, which is, certainly this is working well for, low dimensional examples like grayscale images in 2D and 3D or alpha complexes. But back in the day when our software was bad, people used to use witness complexes for sets of points in high dimension. So I think with 100,000 simplices, you might be at the range where, I don't know if you know this paper where they found like the Klein bottle in this 9-dimensional space of natural images. And there was a lot of density thresholding they did there. So maybe already with density thresholding, multi-parameter persistence, and witness complexes, you could sort of redo some of those examples, but you don't choose the density holding thresholding at the beginning. You allow multi-parameter persistence to handle that for you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again. Very nice talk. Appreciate it.
There's a question in the chat by Aras. What about complexity for digital images, say a 200 by 200 pixel value grayscale image?
But if your image is grayscale, it's one parameter, no? Because you just looked at the sub-level set of this image, but assuming that you have not grayscale but multiple parameters for your image. In fact, the complexity is just with respect to when you look at the homology, you look at you create a boundary matrix from the simplicial complex, and yeah, you just have to the complexity is with respect to the size of this matrix. And yeah, but I don't know how much simplices a cubical complex creates, but yeah, I don't know how much it scale, but I expect it to be, I don't know, like if you talk 100, maybe 1000 with 1000 create, okay, so maybe a few hundred of resolution times a few hundred of resolution, something like this. I don't really know. I haven't done the experiment, but yeah.
Yeah, I think if you have 200 by 200 image, that's on the order of like 40,000 simplices, maybe
Yeah.
times a small
So
constant. So
that's completely
that's totally
doable.
within the range.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for this 1000 simplices, you have to wait a few minutes, I guess.
Okay, are there any more questions? Okay, now my turn to ask my question. I was wondering, you mainly, or at least I was under the impression that you mainly talked about 2-parameter persistence. What about higher parameter persistence? Can you say something about how much more complicated does it get on the computational side, or like the theory seemed to be working for any parameter, I guess?
Yes, all of this should work at any parameter, but the computational complexity is a bit higher, yes. For the sign barcode, depending on what you're looking at, so for example, to compute the one before this one, like, okay, this one, sorry. So the dimension of your module, basically how you would compute this in practice. One way to do it is just to compute the persistence on each possible slices. Okay, and you just infer the dimension of your module with the barcode. Okay, so if you want the dimension of your module at this point, you compute this slice of persistence and you evaluate the dimension of it. So of course there are a bunch of tricks that you can do to make it faster, but the complexity is of this order. So as you can imagine, at each time that you add a parameter, this gets really harder to compute. But you can stop at, I don't know, if your grid is not too big. It also depends on the size of the dataset, but if the grid is not too big, so for example, or the simplicial complex that you're looking at is not too high dimensional. So for example, a graph, you only have 0 simplices and 1 simplices. You can go up to maybe 10 parameter or something less. So if the grid, if your graphs are small, you can go up to this. But yeah, the computations start to be a bit wild with a higher number of parameters. But here I did 2 parameters only because the plot for my screen is 2 parameters. So if you want plots, I have to do 2 parameter stuff. But there are not a lot of filtration in the multiple parameter case. So you have for specific examples. So for example, at the beginning, I showed this, but for immunofluorescence images, what you're looking at is the, um, the density of some protein. So you have some protein markers that will, that will create these images, but you can have hundreds of proteins. So in this kind of examples, you can create a 100-dimensional filtration, but you cannot really compute them. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions? Okay, if that's not the case, thank you, David, again for the wonderful talk, and I'll stop the recording.